Other questions or comments? Harold.
One thing that really is troubling to me, we have the Webb telescope. The House is now has voted against it. We have, all of us, a major responsibility to start putting pressure on them, on our congressmen, with our government that we have at this point, to get some action going. And I think there's got to be some real effort in publicity of and it's not only the space program, it's across the board. We're not getting any action. We don't have it from the top either in clear explanation, clear motivation in any way. It's all for the next election that we're facing. And I don't know exactly how to hit that except try to emphasize it in every way we can, in everything that we do. Look, I looked at Mars back in 1970 when we developed the Nerva rover that I headed. We could have done it. And we were starting to do it when the president decided, nah, we're going to kill the program. And we haven't gotten back to it in any way. It's hard to talk about nuclear today in any way when you get right down to it. And we have major issues in the technology area to get this going, but it's really broader than our space program, which is what's troubling. It's across the board. And we have all the junk, as you indicated, in our budget that's tying this all up. And that, I hope, the super committee will get to work on, but there's no indication yet that they're getting to that point. I'm just complaining. I don't have to say.
I'd like to respond to your complaint, which is one little anecdote. And I do a lot of public speaking. I'm often asked, why should we be spending money on building Hubble or Webb or mission to Mars? What we really need to do is we need to cure cancer. We need to, have people build better batteries, for goodness sake. We need to do technology that's relevant to the planet we live on and to the problems that we have as people, all right? And I'll respond by saying, I once met a young man who said to me, who met me standing in a line for a concert. He said, "You're Heidi Hammel, the astronomer?" And I said, "Yeah." He said, "You're the reason I got a PhD in biology." And I said, how can that be? He said, well, when that comet crashed into Jupiter in 1994, do some of you remember that? Shoemaker leaving line? And it was on the news every night. He said, at that time I had dropped out of college and I had no job, doing nothing. But when I saw you on the TV and you were so excited about watching this amazing cosmic collision and it just inspired me to go back to college and major in astronomy. But when I got to college, I discovered I really didn't like astronomy. So I switched to physics, to biology, and I went on to get my PhD in biology. I hope he cures cancer someday, because it'll be the Hubble Space Telescope that will led him on that path. I volunteer in my kids' library, the little kids' library. I guarantee you they are not taking out books on carbon nanotubules. They are not taking out books on semiconductor technology. They're taking out books on black holes, planets, galaxies, Mars.
Yes.
These are the things that capture the young people's imaginations, who keep them in the fields of science so that they can go on into mechanical engineering, building better bridges, semiconductors, those fields that are the engines of our economy. They don't get that in elementary school, but they do get what NASA does. And that, in my opinion, is why it is one of the most important government science projects that we do.
Incidentally, I think NASA could do a lot more in emphasizing some of the value or the science elements that it's looking for publicly.
By the way, the speaker is Harold Finger, who headed up America's space nuclear program in the 1960s.
A lot of years ago.
Yeah. Okay.
But I'm still pushing.
Okay, Jeff.
Yeah. To go down sort of maybe maybe notch down from strategy to tactics. If we agree that the SMD's budget needs to be increased, do you try to find the funding within the NASA top line from other programs within NASA, or do you try and increase NASA's overall budget? And where does that money come from, given all of the bigger budget battles going on around here these days?
Well, there's going to be different answers on this panel to that question. But why don't I let Scott give his answer? He's a guy who's into budgets and stuff, and then perhaps I'll give my own reflection on it.
Can I just do inspiration?
Yeah.
Well, let's do two pieces to the answer. First piece is increasing the top line. Very difficult in this environment. He doesn't think that it's even possible. I think with all of the things that NASA does for the world and for this nation in particular, in terms of return on investment, inspiration in science, exciting missions that lift all of us up, that it may be possible. But if it's not, then how do you handle a budget that where you want to reallocate resources? You have requirements, you have schedule, you have budget. If the budget's fixed, then all you've got left are schedule and requirements. And I think if you were the administrator, or if you were here on Capitol Hill, you might want to look at whether the schedules that you have imposed for the largest programs are the appropriate schedules. Maybe you ought to stretch a few things out and redistribute some of the resources. That's what I'll say.
Okay. Here's what I'll say. Not that long ago, if you looked at some of these NASA sand charts, the wedges and everything, they would show a big wedge for all kinds of funding for everything without even increasing the top line, because you had the shuttle ending and there's $5 billion a year, and we had completed building everything we wanted to build for the space station and the launches for it, and then there's another $3 billion a year, and Obama did add $1 billion to NASA's budget. There's another $1 billion, and they hit Constellation, and part of it was restored, but Ares 1 is no more. There's another couple of billion a year. How come we don't have a $10 billion surplus here? Okay, well, somehow we don't. Now, but I think, okay, look, it is perhaps unrealistic to talk about increasing NASA's budget. And in fact, if you wanted to do a serious job on the federal deficit, serious job, a material effective federal deficit, what you might propose is simply move back the budgets of all agencies, agency by agency, to their 2008 level. Okay, that would knock out 3/4 of the deficit. It wouldn't take $1 trillion off the deficit over the next 10 years. It would take $10 trillion off. And NASA would go back to $18 billion a year. Okay, but within that, we could conduct a real space program. Okay, now first of all, you have to prioritize. You want to prioritize mission-driven activity. Okay, and because it's the missions that actually deliver product. Okay, so that yes, we do want to fund the planetary, and we do want to fund the space astronomy. Now, and as far as the manned space program is concerned, okay, it needs to be organized around a mission. Now, which it currently is not. There's been a lot of criticism of the SLS program. I happen to be among those who believe that heavy lift is absolutely necessary, but I think it can be pursued far more efficiently simply by issuing a fixed price contract, say $5 billion, put out an RFP to industry to develop a heavy lift system. And you want to do that in conjunction with a couple of other fixed price contracts and develop the HAB module, and you already have one for the entry capsule that's needed to do an asteroid mission, so that you have the booster at the same time you have something for it to launch, okay, and which otherwise you'll never complete the development of the booster because it'll never fly. And that would be the same manned space program, which would accomplish more and cost less than the current one, and deliver real results, and it can be done in parallel, and sort of, well, not just in parallel, but in coordination with a robotic program, which is paving the way towards humans to Mars.
Right.
And I don't think we can increase our budget in this environment, but I just want to say that if our American public knew how truly little we do spend on space, I think that there might be a different answer to the question of where does the money come from. There's a misconception that a third of the federal budget is NASA. People think that, when in fact, yeah, in fact, it's just this tiny fraction, half of 1% of the federal budget. And so there's a disconnect in what people think space costs. The numbers sound big, you know, on a daily basis. Yeah, it sounds like a lot to me to spend this kind of money to build a rocket, but on the federal scale, it's very small, and that's a huge misconception in our public.
We'll take both of these, but first, this gentleman.
Yeah, I've been hearing a lot of good ideas here.